We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Kuf Lamed Hey, the halachot of Kriyat Torah. We're in the middle of the last Saif Yudalit. This learning is dedicated for Refuah Shlema Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid. We started learning about the prohibition of just carrying Sefer Torah for no good reason or not sufficient reason. You know, what do you do when you have Chatan, Kala, Bet Avel? All those things we have not yet fully discussed, and that's when the Mishna discusses it, that you're bringing it a day or two before. In Sif Katan Memtet, Mishnah writes, O Yom O Yomayim Kodem, that you're bringing this a day or 2 days earlier, which makes, will be stationary there, and it will be mutar. And that, the Kaf HaChaim writes, V'acharonim hiskimu, de'u'adinim echid makom leSefer Torah. Even if you're not bringing it a day or two before. By the way, what's a day or two? Haravadia writes in the Teshuvah in the middle of Yabia Omer that this is talking about 24 hours. That's why Yom or Yomayim, day or two, is talking about a 24-hour period prior. But says the Mishnah, even if you're not bringing it a day or two before, but you designate a beautiful place, a clean place with a beautiful Aron Kodesh, which again, nowadays, there are this smaller, portable Aronot Kodesh that people take home when they need the Sefer Torah in a way that is mechubad. He has parochet sometimes, and so on and so forth. That's a whole question by itself. Chacham Bad Yain, Teshuvah in Yechavedat, holds very strongly that parochet is part and parcel of an Aron Kodesh. But as it may, that's a debatable subject by itself. But nevertheless, if you have that, then you don't need even the day or two before. It says in the Mishnah Berura, Be'oto yom sheyeh munach sham yom o yomayim shapir dami. If you bring it that day, but you want it to be there for a day or two afterwards, that also is fine. Now, the Kaf HaChaim, based on Zohar HaKadosh, in our Siman over here, he disagrees with this. He says that you cannot be, you can't move around the Sefer Torah, even if you have a makom miyuchad, even if you have something nice set up for it, you can't just take Sefer Torah for even a day or two, and therefore, based on this, says the Kaf HaChaim, something that's very nogea l'maaseh, says when you have Rahman al-Islam, a mourner's house, and they want to have minyanim at home, and you're taking the Sefer Torah there, based on Zohar HaKadosh, that's not a good thing to do. Now, the Ben Ish Chai even disagrees with this. The Ben Ish Chai, it's in a ha'ara that's written on and shoot Torah Lishma. Now, Torah Lishma is signed signature Yecheskel Kochli. So it seems like a fellow with the name of a Rav, with the name of Yecheskel Kochli wrote it. But again, if we start from Rabbi Avraham Ades, that claimed that the author really is Ben Ish Chai himself, in disguise. And so on and so forth. There's a whole beautiful history behind it. Chacham Bad Yaro, the Teshuvah in Yabia Omer, trying to prove that it's not the Ben Ish Chai, but it says, the Kabbalah is the Ben Ish Chai. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel wrote the entire thing to prove that it is the Ben Ish Chai. We, generally speaking, assume that it perhaps was the Ben Ish Chai, but this is in actually Ha'arot HaMa'atik, so that for sure was written by the Ben Ish Chai. And he writes that, you bring it for the mourner's house, that is fine. There's not really a problem with that. And Chacham Badia paskins the same way as well in Chelek Tet of Yabia Omer, excuse me. And therefore the minhag is really to be mekel, but Heve Yodea, that's a good piece of information to know that even that you're bringing an Aron and a Sefer Torah for the mourner's house, even that is not so simple, according to some poskim, including in them is the Kaf HaChaim, based on the words of Zohar HaKadosh. So says the Mishnah Berura, ובלבד שאני חושב במקום שהכין קודם זמן הקריאה, ובשעת הקריאה יוצאנו ויקרא בה, You have to be very respectful. You bring it there. It has to be in a clean room. In Aron, you take it out. When you want to read it, you put it back. When you're done, and so on and so forth. So that's something important to keep in mind. To keep in mind as well. So it says the Mishnah Berura, Imhu Adam Chashuv. This is based on the Ramah at the end that said if it's an important person, then you could bring the Sefer Torah to them, because that's not considered a disrespect to Sefer Torah. And says the Mishnah Berura, Retzon Omar Gadol Batorah. Adam Chashuv, what does that mean? Means someone that is rich and famous? No. That's for Shalom. It means someone that's Gadol Batorah, Tameh Hacham, someone that is Gadol Batorah. The Adrabah Torah mit'aleh al yedei anashim gidolim, because that is the kavod for the Sefer Torah. Like the Gemara says, Bablai Tipshai, the foolish Babylonians, the Kaimi, that they get up in front of Sefer Torah when the Sefer Torah comes in, but they don't get up in front of a Tameh Hacham when he walks in. Well, it's a walking Sefer Torah. Which one is more important? So, Tameh Hacham being more important than the Sefer Torah itself, when you bring the Sefer Torah Tameh Hacham, is not a degrading act. It's actually an elevation for the Torah that's going to an Adam Chashuv. Hence, the Mishnah Berura writes, it is mutar. Now, this by itself is not a simple fact, because the Adam Chashuv, there are many poskim, including in Yabyaomer and Chacham Ovadia also, that say, right, even if an important person that's not the Tameh Chacham is there, still would be still mutar. Does not have to necessarily be a massive Tameh Chacham for it to be mutar, and hence it would be mutar even for kavod of someone very important. That's even without having the status of a big Tameh Chacham. Now, he writes also that a Chatan is kemo melech. So a Chatan, being like a king, if you have a minyan for a Chatan, this says that makes him like an Adam Chashuv. In the 7 days after the wedding, he's considered an important person. What he becomes after that, that's irrelevant. But for the 7 days, it's Chatan kemo melech, and therefore that makes him an Adam Chashuv, and hence, because we don't need a Tameh Hacham according to him for Adam Chashuv, then hence it will be mutar. And he writes also for kings. This was a massive debate. Like Rav Chaim again is not very happy about this. It's not pashut at all in his eyes. But Rav Ovadia writes, this is one of those things that hitiru mishum kavod melachim. That because of the kavod of the king, which is recognized by us, we make a bracha on a Gentile king. Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed directly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to speak softly and respectfully with even Pharaoh, who was destined to be killed and destroyed, himself, his army, and his people. Even with all that, knowing all of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you go to him, you're speaking to a king, you have to be careful. Because the kavod of melech, the structure of a hierarchy, of a government, is recognized and respected by the Torah. So hence, says already, one of the things that is mutar because of kavod melachim is you take a Sefer Torah to greet them. That was part and parcel of the Jewish life in Galut. And he recognizes the need for that and sanctions that taking of Sefer Torah is one of those things that hitiru mishum kavod hamelech. Okay, so that's one part that's important. Now, if you take a look, it says in Sefer Shemen at the end of Mishnah Berura, I'm beSefer Shemen HaMaor, the bechashuv afilu eno anus shari. Even if he's not anus, we mentioned that people who are stuck in jail, it's not their choice. It's not that they are expecting the Torah to come to them because they feel they're the big people, they're stuck. What do you want to do? They can't come to the Torah. So when they can't come to the Torah, if you have a minyan, we said, if they have a minyan, they're in the jail, the Torah goes to them. But says the Mishnah Berura, says the Shemen HaMaor, that when you have a Adam Chashuv, The Adam Chashuv does, even if he's not stuck, even if he has other choices, it's mutar for him to have the Torah come there for him to hear the Kriyat Torah. Chahabadia agrees with this, even though the Mishna brings v'yesh machbirim b'chashuv lechud v'tov sheyachin makom. It's better to still have an aron and everything. However, this is maybe mekaradin. You could be mekel like Shemen Hamaor, and that's fine. Now the Berura halacha over here in Dibur Matchil Ve'im, starting from the previous page, has a very important line over there. It says, if you take a look at the Mishnah Berura, he wrote that's only Adam Chashuv B'Torah, right? So the Mishnah Berura writes. And he brings from Tashbetz Katan. Tashbetz Katan was not the famous Tashbetz from Algeria, but he was, which was a Sephardi. But Tashbetz Katan is actually one of the Ashkenazim, one of the Talmidim of Maram Mirutenburg. Maram Mirutenburg was taken. This is codified in the Yam Shel Shlomo. The Marshal mentions this in Masechet Gitin, Yam Shel Shlomo, that when he discusses the sugya of hostages and redeeming hostages and so on, he says that I heard that Maram Mirutenburg, when he was taken hostage and he was in jail, and they wanted tremendous money, and the community was ready to pay, and when he heard, he was very upset. He didn't let them do it, and so on and so forth. Historically, he was taken. He was the Gadol Ador of the Ashkenazi communities, and he actually died in jail. That's and after several years, they bought back his body with tremendous money to bury him. The history. Now, one of his Talmidim would go bribe and be able to go there, and behind the bars, he learned with him every day, and he wrote the psakim that he heard from Maram Mirutenburg in Sefer Tashbetz Katan. So it's called Tashbetz Katan. So he writes in there. In Siman Kuf Petet says the Mishnah Berura, Shkatav be'efech mizeh, that he argues with this. Harei mashma midvarav, the anashim gedolim hamuzkarim b'Yerushalmi, that all of those things that he brings over here, that's anashim gedolim, that the Gemara Yerushalmi mentions, are not talmidei chachamim necessarily, and therefore he says it's sarich iyun. So Berura halacha, even though that in Mishnah Berura says Adam Chashuv is only a talmid chacham, in Berura halacha, he kind of like leaves it b'sarich iyun. He recognizes that Tashbetz Katan from one of the Rishonim, in the time of Maram Mirutenburg, he brings not like that, and he leaves it kind of like hanging. Chacham Badia, which I mentioned to you before, is coming on this. He says that the Ikar is like Tashbetz Katan. That even Adam Chashuv, even someone that's a non-Talmid Chacham, that's an important person and respectable in the eyes of the society, that also is considered in Adam Chashuv in this, and therefore you have the right to give him the kavod of taking the Sefer Torah to them. This is the same tshuva that we mentioned before in Yebia Omer, Chelek Tet, Siman Tetvav. Chacham Ovadia concurs with the Tashbetz Katan to be matir, to be lenient on that as well. So that concludes Siman Kuf Lamed Hey. We're starting Be'ez Hashem now. The next Siman Kuf Lamed Vav. Who are the people who are called to Torah, to the Torah on Shabbat? We have 7 aliyot, and that needs to be, again, the number of aliyot that you take is based on the kedusha of the day. So therefore, on regular days, you get 3 aliyot, according to Yisraeli, right? When you have Rosh Chodesh, it's a higher level of kedusha, then you have 4 aliyot. On Yom Tov, you have 5 aliyot. It's even more holy than a Rosh Chodesh. On Yom Kippur, that is a holier Yom Tov, right? It's Shabbat Shabbaton. It's a holier Yom Tov. You have 6 aliyot. On Shabbat, which is the holiest day of the year, right? We don't necessarily reckon with the Shabbat like that because it comes every week, but you don't realize that is, in some sense, is holier than Yom Kippur even. Then you have 7 aliyot. So b'Shabbat v'Yom Tov v'Yom Kippurim korim achar haLevi talmidei hachamim. After the Levi, what's the hierarchy? It's talmidei hachamim. That's why, by the way, the Ashkenazi minhag is that the most important aliyah is shlishi, right? It's very important who gets shlishi. Comes from this Shulchan Aruch. Now, why is it that the Sfaradim feel not like that, and the Hasidim and the Rebbes always get shishi? That is because of Kabbalistic writings, based on the writings of Ariya Kadosh and Marchu. There's a complete different hierarchy to the aliyot, and some of the ones that you would think are very important, they're actually the least important, and Shishi would be coming in the first place as being the most important aliyah. So therefore you have that difference between the Ashkenazi and Sephardim. The best is if you have to respect two people and you have a conflict, if one of them is Ashkenazi, one of them is Sephardi, you give Shlishi to the Minhag Ashkenaz, and you give Shishi to Minhag Sephardi. So, says the Shulchan Aruch, Hamemunim ala Sibur, those who are working for not just regular Talmidei Chachamim, but those who are serving the Tzibur, those who are working and people rely on them for their expertise and for their knowledge. And after that, it's going to be Talmidei Chachamim that are fit for the job, but they don't have the job yet, but they could be. They're ready and they are fit for being people who are in charge of the tzibur. And Ramah writes the criteria of a Talmid Chacham is not someone that went through a drive-through smicha program and got his smicha, and now everyone is going to be upset if you don't call them Harav Gaon with 4 lines of titles. But somebody that you ask him any question, sheshoalim oto davar halacha bekol makom ve'omer, ask him halacha in any area of halacha and he will know it. That's a definition of a Talmid Chacham. I don't know what's the definition of a Rav. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, when he wanted to speak about like the Rabbanim of communities that are not necessarily sanctioned by the Orthodox community, he would call them rabbis, right? Rabbis. He writes it in Hebrew English instead of call them rabbanim, so it's rabbis. But nevertheless, that not everybody that's called a rabbi is a Talmid Chacham. That's Pashut, of course, and that's why he sees the need to say that Talmid Chacham is a person. He's holding everywhere. You could speak to him in halacha in any sugya, and he will be holding there. Of course, it's a very hard. It's a hard standard to live up to in our generation. Of course, the Chazon Ish already writes, the Stifler as well, say like it used to be, and the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says that you're not supposed to ask a question in the middle of shiur off topic, that we mentioned in the Gemara shiur. The Gemara there says in Daf Gimel that Reb Chia chastised his nephew Rav for doing so, even though that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. But so says the Chazon Ish, nowadays, unfortunately, ba'avonotenu harabim, so many even of the so-called Rabbanim or Rabbanim, they're aware of the fact that they're not holding everywhere, so people are not embarrassed to. There's no Shema Titbadeh, that's going to say something wrong. They're going to say, I don't know, because used to be was the ultimate embarrassment for a Talmid Chacham to say I don't know, because they were supposed to and they were expected to know everything. As a Chazon Ish, unfortunately, b'avonotenu harabim, that has changed ever since, is not necessarily the same reality. But nevertheless, this becomes a question across Shulchan Aruch. In Choshen Mishpat, this is a question for halachot of taxes. For over here, of course, is a question, and in many other sugyas as well. To define who is a Talmid Chacham is an important halachic reality. Afterwards is the sons of Talmidei Chachamim, that their fathers are considered people who are in charge of tzibur. So that also gets a kibud. Like the son of a Talmid Chacham is an extension of his father in that way that you respect him not because of who he is, but because of who his father is. In that way, and after that is going to be the heads of shuls, the people who are involved with the tzibur as the you could put English words on it of different titles, but those who are really actually working. It's not about the title, it's about people who are actually working for the tzibur and they're dedicated to the tzibur. They get the first respect, and then after that is going to be kol ha'am, the rest of the people. Now, B'Shabbat v'Yom Tov. Why only Shabbat and Yom Tov? Because we have more aliyot on Shabbat and Yom Tov, and there are more opportunities to be given out for the kibudim that they exist. And says the Mishnah Berura. By the way, this is important to note that during the week, whenever you have 3 aliyot only, the Kaf HaChaim writes that we're not that specific that the shlishi should be the most important person. This hierarchy, we keep it on Shabbat because it's important, because there are a bunch of people. It's not only one aliyah. If you always want to give shlishi on Yemot HaChol and Shabbat afternoons only to based on this, other people never get aliyah, basically, and therefore it's not it's not that important to be specific about the hierarchy on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat afternoon. But when you have a bunch of aliyot, when you have Shabbat, Yom Tov, Yom Kippurim, that's when you plug in all of these rules and regulations for a hierarchy of the Talmidei Chachamim, and so on and so forth. Let's do one more piece over here. Talmidei Chachamim HaMemunim. He brings from the Maharil. That's mitzvah likro b'Yom Tov anashim ma'amidim ha'keilah. It's mitzvah on Yom Tov to call up to the Torah people whose the keilah stands on them, people who do things. You have to recognize and appreciate those people who do a lot for the community, for the kahal. Much of what's done for the kahal is behind closed doors, and nobody really sees the frustration and the difficulties and so on and so forth. So it's a way to publicly thank and appreciate them, says the Maril. That's what's important to do on Yom Tov. Lefichachem kodmin lekol im en sham talmid chacham muflag. Therefore, if they're not notable talmidei chachamim, they take precedence over other people. And the Ben Ish Chai Kaf HaChaim write that people should try to get an aliyah at least once a month. It's important to get an aliyah. And the Kaf HaChaim explains that when a person goes up to the Torah, you ask, what's the big deal? I'm listening to it anyways. As we'll see later on, it's a debatable subject. If Kriyat Torah is a chovat yachid, is a chovat tzibur, it's an obligation, a public obligation, is a private obligation of a person. Especially if you say it's a public obligation, I'm listening to it. So why do I have to go up to the Torah to say a bracha? And the Kaf HaChaim explains, it says when you get an aliyah, when you go up to the Torah, it's like ro'eh penei hamelech. You're going directly up to the king. You're going to the representation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world, which is His Torah, and you show that personal connection that you have with it. Saying a bracha, Asher b'harbanu mikol ha'amim natan lanu et Torato. It's my Torah. With Torato yegei yomam v'layla. It's a private relationship that I have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's something important. It's ro'eh penei hamelech, and therefore it's important when when Chazal say ilmale zachu bnei Yisrael lakpil pnei avihem shebashamayim pa'am achad b'chodesh dayam, that once a month at least you should get an aliyah, says the Kaf HaChaim, based on this, and it's important. It's important. Chacham Ovadia also brings this idea and agrees with it, and he says in Batei Knesset, if you have shuls that are very large, many people, hundreds and hundreds of people daven there, and it's very hard to have everyone get an aliyah. Says Chacham Ovadia, maybe it's fit to add some aliyot to make sure people get aliyah once a month. In that way, of course, you have to. That becomes a very touchy subject, because on one hand we don't want it to be tirchad sibura, that the tzibur should be waiting for long time. On the other hand, this is also an important thing to be mindful of. The Rabbi Eliezer Papo in Turkey, the author of Pelei Yoetz, tremendous sefer, very very highly recommended. He writes that a person that gets the zchut of going up to the Torah should be smach simcha gedola, should be so happy, so excited. It's a zchut to to be getting an aliyah to go up to the Torah, because the ha'ara that comes from the Torah sits with you, and that's a kedusha. Again, Rabbi Ishchai brings this from the son of Marchu, how the orot elyonim emanate from the Torah, and so on and so forth, which Bezrat Hashem